We have our 53, although I'm not sure I'm live everywhere. I think I'm live on YouTube. I'm not sure I'm live on every platform. But we have our 53. We'll have our practice squad in a day. We're going to talk about it and talk about a player that appeared to have some more demand than perhaps we expected. A player who's still on the Broncos. That, of course, is Frank Crum. It's Denver football after dark. Denver football after dark here on this Wednesday morning. In the Mile High City, you see two guys who are on the team, on the 53. And with both of them, the Broncos are playing kind of the long game here. It's fairly obvious with Frank Crum. I mean, here's a guy who played single-digit offensive snaps last year, and there's room for him on the roster. And based on what Sean Payton says, there's demand for him around the league. But you could say the same about Jeremy Crawshaw as well, in terms of playing the long game with him, because he's definitely on the team for what the Broncos hope he can become, and not necessarily for what he is right now, at least in games. And Sean Payton, I think, is expecting and hoping that what you're going to see from him in games eventually is going to be like what he is in practice. But what we've seen from him so far in practice, or in games, I should say, has not matched up to practices. But, of course, he had Thomas Morstead in New Orleans, and Thomas Morstead's worst season was his first year in terms of net average, and by year 4, Thomas Morstead was second-team All-Pro. And that's the sort of thing that he's hoping Jeremy Crawshaw can do. And it sort of shows a sign that if he believes in a punter, he'll be patient. But if we see punts that cost the Broncos something in the short term, you do wonder if that patience is going to be questioned, or is going to be tested. Certainly. So here was Sean Payton talking about Jeremy Crawshaw at his press conference today, because it was no surprise that he was on the 53, but certainly as long as the punts in games do not match the missiles launched in practice, there are going to still be questions about this young punter.
Yeah, and listen, and keep working with him and developing him, and that's part of it. You know, that's part of it. But I think we're going to be happy with him and his ability. And look, it seems to always be that first punt. And so when we're going to create some situations where right in the middle of a practice we'll have a punt, and that before we get to a punt period, you know, and so because the reality of it is that you get an at bat, you know, you don't get like 4 at bats, 5 at bats, and so trying to create those singular events for him, I think will help too.
So the thing about that, of course, is by creating punt periods where it's like, okay, we're stopping practice and we're going to have a punt, it's creating the situation for Crawshaw that replicates games, but you're also stopping practice for everybody else because you're creating this. So, all right, we're going to have a regular period like always. We're going to bring this to a halt. We got to do a punt period. So it's actually affecting the practice for the entire team to do it this way. So think about that for a moment. Usually punt periods in practice, they are typically 6 to 10 punts in succession. What he's talking about is you'll have a series, some team period reps, 7-on-7, whatever. Bring it to a halt. We're going to do a punt right now. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes in the flow of practice. Of course, we're not going to see this in the media because this is going to be after practices are closed to the media, but I do wonder how that will go over because players get used to a certain way of going about things in practice. They get accustomed to certain things. Football coaches, football executives, football players, they are creatures of habit, creatures of routine, and accommodating this is going to be a disruption to said routine. So I do wonder how this is going to go over to make sure that they get Jeremy Crawshaw on the right path. So that is something I was just thinking about. So it's more like a game, yeah. And so certainly it's a good idea to replicate the game situation for Crawshaw. I just do wonder if this is going to. I do wonder if how it's going to go over with the rest of the team. So anyway, here we are, Denver football after dark. Here is punting really that hard to get good at? I mean, it is to some degree. It can be like punting and kicking. A lot of it tends to be like golf in terms of how you approach it, kind of the mechanics of it, the swing, etc. That is the thing I have heard from punters and kickers is that sort of the mental part of it and even kind of swing mechanics of it, there is a significant crossover with golf in terms of how you approach it, right down to kind of the one shot thing. You got to get this right. You know, it's not like going to the practice range, to the driving range and just hitting ball after ball after ball. And then you have to go out there and you got to get the one shot right in the moment. So it's like you can practice it all you want, but then you step up to the tee and you got one shot to get this thing right. So and I think that's also part of why you see often on a lot of teams the best golfers on any football team are punters and kickers. Yeah, good analogy, kicking and golf. And I can't take credit for that. That's just something that I've heard from many a punter and kicker over the many years I've covered this sport, that they've said this time and again, that there's a golf parallel to what they do. So it's not an original thought on my part. This is something I've heard from them. Quite a few of the things I've heard that I share with you are just things that I've heard from people who know more than I do, and I'm just passing them along to you. It's, I just share the accumulation of wisdom and share and pass it along and disseminate it. So, anyway, I think Crawshaw needs the wide hashes makes directional punting easier. Interesting hypothesis. I mean, if you're left hash and you're punting to the right, you've got more space to work with, and vice versa. So if you're in college, you've got more. If you're going to the right, if you're from the left hash, you got more room to work with, and vice versa. But so I think to some degree it makes it easier. To some degree, if you're on the left hash in college and you're trying to punt to the left, or if you're on the right hash in college and you're trying to punt to the right, it's easier in the pros. So I think it just depends what you're trying to do in a specific punt situation to say whether it's easy or not. And injury settlement, how is that? Well, it basically, a lot of times the injury settlement will be, it's worked out by how long you expect the injury to last, and then what it'll be. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. I got to blow my nose here. Hang on. I don't want anyone to hear that. It's nasty. So the injury settlement, let's say you expect the injury to be 5 weeks. Typically, an injury settlement will be about 5 weeks salary. Think of it that way. Most injury settlements translate to a salary covering the number of weeks that the player is injured, and then they kind of go and then rehab, and then because what'll happen is usually injury settlements are for injuries that tend to be more kind of shorter term in nature and not longer term. Longer term injuries tend to be they in preseason, for example, they'll go through the waived injured process, which means they'll go through waivers and then they'll transfer to injured reserve and be out for the season. And then usually when you go through waived injured, then you come back to injured reserve, you drop to a lower salary level than if you just go straight to injured reserve and be done. You basically get knocked down about roughly kind of half salary in that case. You're still on the team, but so a player that kind of passed through waived injured, like Matt Henningsen, would drop to a lower salary level than someone like, say, Johnny Walker Jr., who was injured and is out for the year, but he did not pass through the waived injured process. So sometimes you're just willing to say, okay, we're willing to take that chance of someone picking him up off waived injured. Most guys aren't, but there are rare occasions where a player is picked up off waived injured and goes somewhere else. But usually those players are not picked up. And then it's kind of a procedural thing. You get the salary down, which does give you a little bit of salary cap relief, especially when you're talking about a player who was, say, someone like Henningsen was someone who was on your practice squad the year before and was only on a reserve future contract, so you didn't have a guaranteed salary associated with him, that kind of thing. So if you didn't have a guaranteed salary and you would have just waived him and he wasn't on your team, he would have just gotten nothing. So he's at least getting something, as opposed to if he'd just been waived and you didn't bring him back, he would have gotten nothing. So there's all these little things. Yes, the NFL is incredibly complicated. That being said, it's not as complicated with these salary cap things as the NBA. I defer to NBA reporters on anything salary cap related to the NBA. I do not understand the mid-level exemptions and all that sort of thing. I would have to cover the NBA full-time and dive into that to truly understand all that. That might as well be in Klingon, all the exemptions in the NBA. I don't understand. I don't get that. I can explain the NFL to you. I can explain the Major League Baseball luxury tax rules. I cannot explain the NBA. So anyhow, when they do not have to cover their own medical expenses. Teams do take care of that. It's not that is not something they have to do. So they are covered. And anyhow, so that it's not that. I mean, the NFL can be heartless. It's not that heartless. So they are covered for the injury. Devin Key made it over Delarian Turner-Yell and Sam Franklin. Yes. Now, word coming down, Sam Franklin is headed to the Buffalo Bills. So that actually gives the Broncos a little bit of a break there. Sam Franklin going to the Buffalo Bills means they're going to get an offset on the contract. So we talked about this with Sam Franklin. If the Broncos released him, that there would have been the potential of some cap impact contractually if he gets unsigned, or if they tried to pass him through the practice squad and he'd been on their practice squad as a veteran player. Well, now that's all gone. He's no longer with the team. He's with the Buffalo Bills, and offset language means that's it. So the Broncos are in pretty good shape there. And yeah, they appear to like Devin Key. And Delarian Turner-Yell, of course, he was coming back from a torn ACL. And the thing with Delarian Turner-Yell, this is kind of a case where it's a little bit of the old Wally Pipped, basically. Because the thing that Delarian Turner-Yell did best was special teams. That's where he distinguished himself back in 2023. Certainly he struggled when he was asked to go out there at safety. I mean, we just go back to September of that year when he was thrown into the fire against Miami, against Chicago, and didn't go very well. But he distinguished himself as one of the Broncos' better special teamers that year as a core 4 guy in that phase. Well, then he gets injured. He doesn't get back to the field in 2024. J.L. Skinner basically takes his spot. So while he's injured and recovering, he loses his job to J.L. Skinner. And then you get a new special teams coordinator in Darren Rizzi. And Darren Rizzi talked about how when J.L. Skinner came out through the draft process, that he was scouting J.L. Skinner, so it seemed like he liked J.L. Skinner an awful lot. And you can't blame him for doing so. J.L. is that classic kind of hair on fire guy, the way he runs down the field on coverage. He's reckless abandon kind of guy. And he's become that core 4 guy, that safety that's a core 4 special teamer. Basically, he replaced Turner Yell. So that's where I say, hey, it's the Wally Pipp thing. You got injured, you got replaced. So that's it. It happens sometimes. It's a tough, cutthroat business. And thus, there you go. Clay Webb, get to the practice squad. Well, the one thing I will say, and I pointed this out on last night's show as well, in the Sean Payton era, the previous 2 years, none of the players who were waived on Monday, the day before the cut deadline, none of the players waived on Monday were eventually brought back to the practice squad on the Wednesday of that week. Because the cut down day the last few years has been on a Tuesday since they changed to the current schedule where it's no game in the final week of the preseason before training camp, before the regular season, when they got rid of the 4th preseason game. So when the cut down date has been on Tuesday, they've had some cuts on Monday. None of those Monday cuts in the previous 2 years were on the practice squad. And Clay Webb was a Monday cut, as was Joaquin Davis. So there's a first time for everything. So I'm not saying it definitely won't happen. But if we go by the previous 2 years, the pattern of the previous 2 years is that Clay Webb, Joaquin Davis would not be on the practice squad. So take that as you will. Again, like I said, first time for everything. So we'll see what happens. We're going to get the practice squad on Wednesday and we'll know. But certainly if that pattern continues to hold true, we would not see Clay Webb on the practice squad. So that's something to consider. People asking about the throwbacks. I mean, Technis Fieldbrit brings that up. Grass Valley Greg talking about it. So we should get the uniform schedule here sometime in the next week, I would imagine. What we do know is we know some of what other teams are doing. Like we know Washington is wearing its throwback uniforms when the Commanders play the Broncos on Thanksgiving weekend. So personally, even though it would be reenacting Super Bowl 22, a bad day for the Broncos, yeah, I like to see the Broncos wear the throwbacks in Washington. Just give us a beautiful uniform matchup for that game. That would be amazing visually. Maybe the best uniform matchup of the year in the NFL, if that happened, probably right there with if the Seahawks wear their throwbacks in Tampa when the Bucs do throwbacks. I don't know if they are. I'd have to look that up. I will say this, not knowing what the Broncos are doing uniform-wise, for the practice on Tuesday, we did see the Broncos offense wearing orange jerseys. So usually what the Broncos offense is wearing in practice is what the team will be wearing in the game. So food for thought there. So maybe that means they're going to be wearing orange when they go to week 1, which I think would probably make all of y'all pretty happy. Because I think wearing white at home for the initial home regular season games of the last 2 years has kind of made some people upset in Broncos country. And of course, they've lost their home openers the last 2 years. And maybe the superstitious lot that football people tend to be are thinking, okay, let's change that. So that's something to think about here. So anyway, upside for Crene Reed over Lavelle Bailey. I mean, a year younger for one thing. Frankly, that was one. If there was a move that was a little bit surprising, probably that. And even with Crene Reed, he had the higher signing bonus. If you'd asked me a couple weeks into camp, and I think I said this on this show, a couple weeks into camp, I thought Crene Reed probably was in the lead as far as undrafted players to make the 53. Jordan Turner probably closed, and it looked like had passed Reed, and certainly he had that great game against Arizona as well. So I thought if there was going to be an undrafted linebacker as a rookie who made the 53, I thought Turner had probably reached him or surpassed him. So on a couple of levels, it was a little bit of an upset that Reed ended up getting the spot in my eyes, but between beating out Bailey and beating out Turner. Sometimes, though, this ends up being a decision based on likelihood of passing through waivers. And so maybe you're saying, okay, we didn't think Crene Reed would pass through waivers. We thought there was a better chance of Lavelle Bailey passing through waivers, so we're going to make this call. Passing through waivers, of course, is something that comes up with Frank Crum. It came up last year, and it came up again as Crum makes the 53, even though he's somebody who is he is behind Matt Parrott at left tackle and behind Alex Palczewski at right tackle. So he is number 3 at both tackle spots right now. But he's somebody the Broncos are high on, and somebody that, according to Sean Payton, has received a lot of interest from around the NFL.
We've had 3 teams call on him. And it's the upside and the size and the athleticism, his feet, his protection. Like, we have a clear and a really good vision for what we think he can become, and that ceiling is high. And so, and you can tell there are other teams doing their homework the same way.
Maybe I'm biased because I asked the question that led to this response, but I actually thought this was the most interesting thing that Sean Payton said on Tuesday, and maybe the response that has the most long-term implications for this team, because clearly they're playing a long game with Frank Crum. Think about this. Just step back for a moment. Last week, they trade Devon Vele. Sean Payton has said it was difficult to trade Devon Vele, but eventually a trade offer reached a point with multiple teams interested. We know the Jaguars were interested, for example. So multiple teams interested in Devon Vele, to where the market got driven up to a point where eventually there was an offer the Broncos could not refuse for Vele. That included a 4th-round pick that could well be the first pick of that 4th round, and thus the first pick of day 3 in next year's draft if New Orleans crashes the way I think a lot of people expect. Especially when you look at that quarterback situation. Spencer Rattler, Tyler Shuck. I mean, I'm sorry. Best of luck down there. So, eventually there was a price point, and the Broncos trade him. But now you have Frank Crum, and there were multiple teams interested in him. And Vele is a player that is closer to playing time than Crum. I mean, Crum has to have, basically, he's got to have at left tackle 2 guys go down. At right tackle, 2 guys go down to get in the lineup. Like, there has to be bunch of things happen for him to play regularly. And despite multiple teams being interested in him, the Broncos are so sold on his potential, have such a belief in him long term, that they're saying, no, we want him. We appreciate the interest from multiple teams. So they could have played the game and said, okay, let's see what kind of offers here. Let's see what the market is. But no, they want to keep turning the page with Frank Crum. So again, just think about what this means in terms of their long-term roster planning here. I don't know that you're doing this for a guy for whom you have a vision of just swing tackle. Now, remember, you just signed Matt Peart to a 2-year extension as a backup. Looks like left side backup, left tackle, left guard. You have Alex Palczewski, who is in his 3rd year. It's going to be his RFA year after his RFA offseason after this. You have Garrett Bowles on a 4-year contract. You have Mike McGlinchey, who's in the 3rd year of his deal. We do have a deep year of offensive tackles coming up in this year's draft, but clearly they see something very long-term in Frank Crum. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be sitting here saying, well, we're just going to turn down offers here. That was really an interesting response that Sean Payton gave. And here's Mike McGlinchey elaborating a little more about Frank Crum when I asked about him a few minutes later.
Frank has come such a long way. I love working with Frank, and he's been such a great partner. Alex Palczewski and I kind of have the right side tackle thing going over there, an individual. He gets after it every single day. He's so tough, and he's an intelligent football player, and it's why his development has just kind of kept going and going. And obviously he's got the physical attributes to be very successful at the game of football. He's a huge guy. I think he's even got me beat in height, which is pretty rare in our league. And he's strong, he's quick, he's got all the tools that he needs. And I think, Frank's we're lucky to have Frank Crum in our building, that's for sure. And the depth that he provides and the push that he provides all of us goes a long way.
You like that. He's pushing that. This guy who's raw is pushing. I mean, I think the athleticism matters as well. And also, the other thing is, as you talk about this line that is moving toward more wide zone principles, and what do you need for wide zone? You need guys who are quick, long, agile, athletic. I mean, and intelligent. Like, so all of these attributes are things that Frank Crum checks the boxes on. Of course, he's raw, but I mean, I think back to like how let's go in the Wayback Machine, for example, when Mike Shanahan was here, and how they would develop some of their blockers, right? I mean, if you were a Bronco fan in the late 90s through the 2000s, maybe you recall, Matt Lepsis, guy who was a tight end out of CU, and they played the long game, developing him into a tackle and putting, they got him in the weight room and they got him working, and they turned him into a pretty good tackle for a few years. And again, they would kind of play the long game with some guys to develop them into eventual contributors as well. So, I mean, that was, again, this is why I kind of talked about this kind of the long game at cuts. I started with Jeremy Crawshaw and talked about Thomas Morstead a bit, because in New Orleans with Thomas Morstead, the punter that Sean Payton had for more than a decade, it took 3-4 years before Morstead became one of the game's best punters. And when he got at cruising altitude, he stayed there for a while. He stayed there for about a decade. And that's what Sean Payton wants. He wants to get that guy who's at that level for a while, and then he doesn't have to think about it. Like the punter or kicker, where it's just like he turns on the light switch and there he is. just is going to do a good job and he doesn't have to think about it. That's what he wants. But he's going to have to lean on his experience of back when Thomas Morstead was a rookie, and it wasn't always like turning the light switch on. That sometimes the light kind of, I'm looking at my light up above here, and the light kind of flickered on and off sometimes, and it just, you're like, oh, what is it going to turn on there? Like, that's what it might be for Jeremy Crawshaw. Like when you see that first punt there in New Orleans, and it just kind of line drives, and sometimes we see it in practice. Like there'll be one that kind of line drives, and it's about 3.76 hang time. And it's like, ugh, and then all of a sudden there's that 5.50 missile, and there's that 5.1 bomb, and 5.2. It's like, gosh, why can't he do this all the time? So anyway, the long game. They played the long game with Frank Crum last year. Of course, they didn't play the long game with Caleb Lohner, at least not on the 53, because he's not with the Broncos right now. Now, I brought up the stat yesterday. Players that are drafted and are waived at the cut day, the last 3 years, roughly 16% of them are claimed off waivers, compared to 4% of all other players that are waived on that day, not counting the day before, that are waived on deadline day. So about 4 times as likely for a player in that year's draft class who is waived to be claimed than another player. So we'll wait and see on Caleb Lohner. So they did not do for Caleb Lohner what they did for Frank Crum last year, and this year, what they did for Corinne Reed this year. Always say, focus on what they do, not what they say. Now, sometimes what they say does reveal something. It does illuminate from time to time, but what they do is more important. So what they did in terms of Frank Crum, Corinne Reed, on the 53, playing the long game with them, Caleb Lohner, not on the 53, that tells you what they think of their potential, and playing the long game with them compared to what they see in terms of the long game with Caleb Lohner. They didn't see enough to use a spot on him. They chose to use a spot on the 53 for Lucas Krull rather than Caleb Lohner. So some of it, they chose to take a risk. They chose to take a risk rather than be the sure thing. Now maybe they get him back on Wednesday, and then the roll of the dice paid off. I can't think what they're hoping is that the film of Caleb Lohner out there and the reports on Caleb Lohner, that it sort of gives every team pause, and okay, they can slip him through, and then all right, they can continue the process. But they chose not to take the chance with Reed. They chose not to take the chance with Crum, but they chose to take the chance with Lohner. Some of that is also based on, this is on judging the market. This is another thing. If you get calls on players, if you get calls and you hear, oh, there are 2 or 3 teams interested in this guy, then you know that player's probably not slipping through waivers. If you don't get calls on a guy, then that's an indication that that player may have a better chance of slipping through waivers. Now, it's not an exact science, because maybe some teams are going to be coy about their interest. And that's another thing, because the Broncos, they're sitting there sifting through they sifted through the waiver wire tonight. As Sean Payton noted, they have people in their pro scouting staffs. They divide it up by by groups, by divisions. Say someone's going to take this division or these two divisions. Someone's going to take these two divisions. Then you're going to go through the wire. You're going to cross-check, what your scouting reports were. This is where, especially if you're looking at this year's draft class, you go back and you reference your reports. You even reference your board. If there's somebody on the wire that let's say you had a 4th round grade on a guy who's waived. Then you go and say, okay, why was this player waived? What happened in the camp? Were they a dud? Or did something go wrong? Did they just have a bad summer? Did they have an injury? What happened? Why did this player not launch? Why was this player waived? Was it a bad situation, bad scheme? Is it on the player or is it on the team? Did he just not fit? What happened? If it's on the player and maybe they just found out, okay, this guy, he's just not going to work. And this team just found that out for all of us, and our scouting was wrong, and okay, then we'll cross this guy off. As the owner in Major League said, the late Margaret Whitten, played by the late Margaret Whitten, cross him off then. Or is it something else? Is it, maybe it was a bad scheme fit, didn't get along with the coach, blah, blah, blah. But if we get him here, it'll work out and we can take a shot. But then that means parting ways with someone on your 53, which is why there are some players that on every team that are probably still nervous tonight. I would argue that Frank Crum, based on what Sean Payton said on Tuesday, Frank Crum is probably one of those players who probably has no need to be nervous. I'd say he's probably pretty safe, even though he doesn't have a starting spot right now and may not have a starting spot for another couple of years at least on this team. He may get to his second contract and not be a starter and yet may still be here and may be a long-term answer. Think about that for a moment. Frank Crum may sign a contract extension here and still be a backup, and yet they may still have a long-term plan for him. I feel that, Lohner did. I agree with you, Lonnie. They didn't play enough college football. He played 50-some snaps. We were one of the guys that we talked about heading in the draft was Luke Lachey, who ended up being drafted by the Texans 20 picks later, and the Texans waived him today. So, or on Tuesday, pardon me, now we're in Wednesday. So, it's not an exact science, obviously. But, I think it's part of it. You're talking about a guy with double-digit snaps, and those snaps, most of them were in garbage time. We're not even talking about meaningful snaps for the most part. We're talking about snaps that really weren't high-leverage snaps. So, every angle. I appreciate that. Thank you. There's, the film saves us from losing Lohner. Yeah, it might well be. It might well be that. He's raw. Now, what we do know is the Colts had interest in signing him to an undrafted contract. That's probably the team maybe to look out for, that they might put in a claim. So we'll find out. We'll find out about that. We'll know by midday tomorrow whether Caleb Lohner could be back or not. If he passes through, I would not be surprised if he's back. I think there's no reason not to. Just kind of turn the page and see where he goes. At the very least, he's an extra body for a tight end. I would not be surprised if Caden Prescorn and Caleb Lohner are back on the practice squad as well. I did mention this in Orange and Blue today. Got to tip the cap to Lucas Kroll, Jordan Jackson, Eni Awazarike, Tyler Bidet, and Jaleel McLaughlin, because here you have 5 guys, like the Burgers, 5 guys who played positions where the Broncos brought in new guys, whether you're talking about Savion Jones or Evan Engram or R.J. Harvey, J.K. Dobbins, brought in guys basically to kind of take their jobs, push them out. And they don't have the same roles as last year. Lucas Kroll is a backup now, and and basically he was a backup last year, but Lucas Kroll is kind of pushed out of the pass catching tight end role. And these guys fought tooth and nail to keep their jobs on the roster. I mean, they didn't capitulate. They said, if you're going to take my job, I'm going to claw and scratch with everything I have to stay around. I mean, you look at Awazarike and Jordan Jackson, you pick a third-round guy like Savion Jones, I mean, he's making the team. And yet Jackson and Awazarike, I thought, responded with the best camps they've had. You know, like, you're not. I mean, Savion Jones had a terrific camp, but Jackson and Awazarike are like, hey, you're not taking this from me. Most 3-4 teams do not keep 7 defensive linemen. The Broncos did, because Jackson and Awazarike said, hey, I dare you to cut me, because they had great camps. I mean, they made themselves indispensable. Now, I'm curious to see what the game day active situation is like, because I imagine they're probably still only going to activate 5 defensive linemen. But Jackson and Awazarike made themselves too good to cut based on their camps. And they probably ensured that one of them is still going to get a jersey, and Savion Jones, as well as he's played in camp, might still be watching from the sidelines in sweats, at least for the short term. And it's nothing against Savion Jones. It's because Jackson and Awazarike were that good. My guess is that Jackson probably holds on to that 5th defensive line spot, because he really didn't do anything to lose it. So, but it's a good problem to have. It also probably kind of tells you, it probably foretells the Broncos not re-signing John Franklin Myers. It's nothing that JFM doesn't do or hasn't done, but when you draft Savion Jones, Jordan Jackson's in year 2, and he'd be in year 3 in 2026, and then he'd be RFA the following off season. You've got, in Awazarike is in his 3rd year, of course, because he had the suspension year. So you have these guys that are still under team control, and they've played well. I mean, it probably even threatens Malcolm Roach as well, who's also in a contract year. So you have these guys who had really good camps and have played well. I mean, JFM and Roach are really good players, but you have these are tough decisions that you have to make, and when you have these guys that are playing well and they're on rookie contracts, then it just may be kind of a bottom line decision that ends up being made, especially after you've re-signed Zach Allen. So, anyway, just something to consider as well, that these things end up happening. So, what is your take not having a fullback to week 4? Well, they could bring back Adam Prentice on Wednesday. They could have him on the practice squad, and they could use 3 elevations on him. They could do the same exact thing with Adam Prentice that they did with Michael Burton. They could have 3 elevations and then bump him up to the 53, just like Michael Burton. So that's still in play if they want to have a fullback who's been in Sean Payton's offense, 1 year for Payton, another couple of years with New Orleans with Pete Carmichael, and then he was with the Saints last year as well. So if you want to do that, you can. You can do the exact same thing. Really tough break for Michael Burton. Torn hamstring. He's out for the season. So the other thing also to consider is you're going to get Nate Atkins back to health at some point. Like you're going to work him back in, and Nate Atkins can be your fullback as well. So just something to go into play. Cost-controlled starting left guard. Well, yeah, we're fixing to find out on that. Still going to be Ben Powers for the moment. Still under contract. We'll see. We are fixing to find out. I love that Gary Kubiak phrase. It's so useful in so many ways. It allows me to get away with kind of saying wait and see. It's a more elegant way of saying wait and see. We're fixing to find out. And it's got a Bronco historical connection too, which is always good to use here. Man, guess what? We're going to be actually watching real football in about 8 days, because it's Thursday Night Football is going to start the season. We're watching real NFL football. We're going to be watching some more college football. Would it surprise you if Prieskorn got the nod over Prentice. You may not have to choose between both. The other thing is, if Atkins might be back by week 1, you may not even have Prentice. It may just be Atkins getting all the reps. Is Forsythe the main backup guard now? If you're talking about game day active roster, yes, potentially. Although maybe the main right guard. I thought it was very significant that Matt Parrott was getting the left guard snaps last Saturday. And like Sean Payton said, when I asked him about it after the game, that you have some linemen that prefer to be backups on one side rather than being like a swing tackle, like left tackle, right tackle, that some guys prefer to just be a backup on one side. Because basically, the way it's been described to me, going from left tackle to right tackle, is going from one side to the other. They say, okay, when you go to number 2, when you poop, what hand do you wipe with? And you'll answer the hand. I say, okay, wipe with your other hand. Because like almost always you wipe with the same hand, right? It's like an instinctive thing. Then try to do it with the other. It's not as easy because you've always done it one way. So that's how it is. Everything, you have to reverse everything. Some guys are comfortable with that, some aren't. So Matt Parrott, working at left guard, possibly appears to be one of those guys who's more comfortable having his 2 positions at which he's a backup be on the same side. So what you're talking about now appears to be Matt Parrott being a primary backup at left tackle and left guard. And thus Alex Forsythe, primary backup, right tackle, right guard. Now, let's say something happened to Garrett Bowles and Parrott went to left tackle, then Forsythe would probably be your left guard backup as well, unless you bump Calvin Throckmorton up as well, presumably. Because I'm presuming that Calvin Throckmorton probably ends up back on the practice squad as he was last year. Of course, he's been released. Not waived, released, so that means he can kind of choose where he goes. I would expect Throckmorton to be back on the practice squad on Wednesday. That's something that I would expect to see. So, anyway. Mace at night is the only type of mail. Oh, I appreciate that. Any surprises? I think the biggest surprise was probably Lavelle Bailey not making it and going with Reed. I think that was probably the one that, if you're asking those of us in the beat writer core, I think that was the one that probably was the biggest surprise to all of us. So Powers is and will be a liability this season. I mean, the one thing you have to say is in introducing more wide zone principles, that's not something that appears to suit his skill set exceptionally well. Hopefully, it's something that he can get accustomed to and get comfortable with. I mean, I think just for the offensive line in general, it's something that Mike McGlinchey kind of referenced as something that's just going to take some time for the unit, but the race to get better. Now these things start counting here in 11 days. So can't believe they waived Courtney Jackson. I mean, I think part of it with Courtney Jackson and just the receivers in general is figuring, okay, there are a bunch of these guys that they like, and they're making the presumption that not all of them are going to be picked up, and historically a pretty low claim rate for wide receivers off the waiver wire after deadline day. So I think they're saying, okay, maybe one of these guys is claimed and then the others pass through. So I think that probably informed their decision. Estimate a snap percentage for RJ Harvey right away. I'd say week 1, 40%. Just gonna guess that. 40%. Wide receiver, too much talent, tough room to break into. Yeah. And when you got Trent Sherfield, who's going to be active on game days because he's a special teamer as well, and Pat Bryant kind of has that wide receiver 4 spot. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of who the practice squad guys end up being. If A.T. Perry passes through, I think he ends up being one of them. And even if you see a rookie or two in there, an undrafted rookie, if somebody gets injured in the wide receiver core on the 53 player roster, I think A.T. Perry, assuming he is healthy, having fully come back from the injury, it kept him out. A.T. is probably the first guy up because of his experience in this offense, having played in it in New Orleans under Pete Carmichael. And even last year, when he was on the practice squad, he got some first-team reps in practice. So he's got a little bit more of a base kind of going in. And he does fit the Sean Payton template size-wise. He's definitely Pete Carmichael's guy. If he's not claimed, I expect he's going to be there. That's something that, us beat writers are sometimes wrong in our consensus. We all felt Joaquin Davis, probably felt more of him. So I'm not saying we're perfect and right on it, but I'd say Perry's probably going to be on the practice squad. But we'll see. Courtney Jackson, I think it depends if he passes through or not. I think the Broncos would like him back because he's probably their primary returner beyond Marvin Mims Jr. If something happens to Mims, I think Jackson all of a sudden ends up playing quite a bit, especially on special teams. So will any of our cuts make another team's 53? Here's the thing. For all the chatter about this team being deeper and the tough cuts and all that, some of the proof's going to kind of be in the pudding of whether we see any Broncos players claimed off waivers or not. And if we see a player claimed, then, okay, yeah, there's evidence. But it'll be interesting if none of the players are claimed. Then maybe we rethink the whole thing. So, anyway, Perry has pretty good speed. Yeah, you could say Perry's kind of a, he's got the attributes, and he had the flashes 2 years ago. The injury set him back. I do wonder how this camp would have been for him if he had not missed the entire offseason. I wonder how it would have looked for him overall if he had not missed the entire offseason. I mean, what I will say is that, he didn't play Saturday. I think there was probably some method to that madness of him not really being involved in that game, because I think maybe a little bit, or not playing extensively, because he did get out there, but was he? He was targeted once, didn't get thrown to, and he played. How many snaps did he play here? I'm just cheating here. I'm gonna look this up. It's always a great show, by the way, when I take a look. Okay, yeah, 10 snaps that he played. So the only wide receiver for the Broncos who played fewer snaps than A.T. Perry was Trent Sherfield. He played 5. So, I mean, that's putting him out there, but that's that's getting him out there to kind of get him some run. That's kind of hiding him. So I wonder if there was a little bit of that going on. What I can tell you is, he did practice last week. I mean, we can't do play-by-play on practice last week because now they're in regular season mode. But he looked pretty good. Is basically what I can say. So, and food for thought. So, anyway, receivers below 6'3" need not apply unless you've got shiftiness and moves galore like Marvin Mims Jr. and you can return the ball. So. Anyway, I think Estimate could make a 53. I think so too. I personally, you don't have room for everybody. I don't know I don't know who I would have cut, but I would have liked to have seen Estimate stick around. He's young. Thought he looked good on Saturday. I I would have liked to have seen him stick just a little bit longer. Just keep turning the page and see. So, anyway. My voice is kind of going here. I have to apologize for this. I think I have a little little thing coming on here. So, anyway, it's 1:20 in the morning. We got a practice coming up on Wednesday. So, appreciate all the comments here on this post deadline edition of Denver Football After Dark. And we'll be back in a day or so to talk about the practice squad and how that looks and dive into that. Sometimes I find the practice squad composition even more interesting than the back of the roster, especially because we start talking about sort of some guys that the Broncos are looking at in the development. We won't hear from Sean Payton on Wednesday. He's not going to talk, so we'll hear from a couple of players. But we'll just kind of dive into sort of the implications of the players the Broncos kept, and even take a look around at maybe some Bronco players that landed elsewhere, because inevitably we end up seeing, as we saw last year, like Jalen Virgil took a contract with Buffalo rather than the Broncos. So sometimes we see players the Broncos wanted that end up going elsewhere when it all goes down as these practice squads are constructed. So anyway, appreciate you subscribing, Ryan. Appreciate all of you coming in and joining me on this. You ever think the 53 come 55 or 56? I hope so at some point. I'm an advocate of bigger rosters. I'm an advocate of bigger game day rosters. I hate the whole deactivate thing. It's sort of an old school thing. Good morning, Eric. Good to see you. You can rewind the show, find out what you missed as we talked. We basically talked a lot about Frank Crum and Jeremy Crawshaw, and we kind of dove into the roster a little bit and and Corene Reed, Lavelle Bailey, and kind of, what some of these moves mean and how. And like I said, like the title of the show said, playing the long game at some of the cuts and what these things imply. So. Stay saucy. Yeah, Cecil, my friend, is frosty. I stay saucy here on all my shows, including Denver Football After Dark here. And I appreciate you joining me on this Wednesday morning edition of the show. Thanks for watching, of course. Like, comment, share, subscribe if you like this. Tell your friends about what's going on. I appreciate all of you helping send the subscriber count on this channel up above 3,000. This is more than I expected. It's gone from 1,000 to 3,000 here in the last several weeks, and I really appreciate that. I've got a personal goal of getting this thing to 5,000 by the end of the season, so thank you all for riding with me and watching these shows. I've got a shorter piece on Cut Down Day that you can find here at the Mace Denver channel. Of course, I've got my show with Cecil Lammy, Orange and Blue Today. You can watch that at the Denver Sports YouTube channel as well. We'll have more to chat about at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the Denver Sports YouTube channel. Cecil Lammy and I break down everything from Wednesday at Broncos practice. So that's it for now. So appreciate you watching. Take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.